Absolutely, that'd be wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. So now I got to read a little bit into your background before we started today. I was really impressed. Is there anything that you think is especially important for us to share with our audience members?
I'm not sure. I'm not great about talking about myself or saying how I'm awesome or anything. Uh let me think. I'm a man of many hobbies. It's something that's not in my bio. I like to do many things between photography or small board electronics work or and teaching my son how to do that as well. So that's probably something that's not on my bio that I think I would want everyone to know. I'm kind of a nerd.
I love it. Absolutely love the nerds. Okay, so let's dive in here. Would you feel comfortable telling us about your experience in the military? I'm especially interested to hear what kind of leadership skills you acquired while you were in.
Sure. So I was a senior line medic with 164 Armor, 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart, Georgia. I was in charge of the forward support company, Foxtrot Company, for medical readiness training, and then they had a mission platoon that, if you've ever seen the movie American Sniper, the T-barrier mission that Bradley Cooper's character was guarding over. We weren't doing something as high speed as that during the day, but we did do that mission at night.
Very cool. All right. So what kind of leadership skills do you think were important to facilitate those missions? Maybe above and beyond anything that you'd needed previously.
I was 21 years old when when I had to learn all these skills, but I distinctly remember the something that a really good friend of mine in NCO once said to me. It's important that you don't tell people what to do, but you evangelize them to your idea, whatever it may be.
Ooh, I like
So
that.
yeah, so if you want to get someone to do something, walking in and squaring your shoulders off and being a butt about it is not the way to get someone to do anything. And this is true whether I mean, you can kind of get away with it in the military, we all know that, but like in the civilian world, you can't. And so but I think that NCO was trying to prepare me for the eventuality of not being in the military by telling me that is that it's important to get people on your team to understand why what you want to do is important. And that skill served me so well because I was an E4 in the Army, and I had to speak with captains and majors and lieutenant colonels and sergeant majors and the gamut, and tell them what they had to do in terms of training. Or I actually told a captain one time we weren't going on a mission because we didn't have what was CENTCOM operations spec for evac equipment on our vehicles, and he told me
Mhm.
I couldn't do that. And like a colonel was standing there and he goes, actually, he can tell you to do that, and it's not going to happen. So you're going to get it done.
Excellent. I mean, honestly, especially being so young when you were in, my husband is also a military veteran, and it's kind of bonkers the kind of things that y'all are responsible for at 21, 22, 23 years old. And it's skills that, especially in the civilian world, you can see people don't learn until their 40s or 50s, if ever. So I think that you're right. That's a really important skill to know, not only for what you were doing at the time, but the ramifications it could have on your life once you enter the civilian world.
Yeah, the corollary to that, just to give you an idea, my supply sergeant was kind of a funny guy and gave me like the NSN list. There's you can get these things that show you what everything costs. I was in charge of almost $5 million worth of medication, medical equipment, and supplies at 21. And you gotta think, how does the DoD get away with this sometimes?
Right?
But yeah, you're right. I mean, I've talked to people who are, I'm 37 now, and I've talked to people who are 20 years my senior who have never been in charge of more than $1 million worth of anything.
Hmm. Yeah. So how long were you in total?
I spent, just to give you an idea, so I was in two branches of the military. I was U.S. Air Force Reserves for 2 years. This was from 2005 to 2006, and I was mobilized in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, as well as to help with recovery and remediation operations for Katrina.
Wow.
Um, and then that was 2 years, and then I spent 4.5 years in the Army. And then 2 years IR, obviously. So
Yeah.
total 8 years of service according to the DoD.
Oh my word. So as you were you ever in a position where you were starting to think about transitioning into a civilian career? Or was it one of those things where you were in and then all of a sudden you were not? Like, was that transition on your mind, going into it? Or is it something that kind of only occurred to you like as it was already happening?
I kind of went into the military with the idea of transitioning out already. I mean, that's not something that everyone does, but I grew up in a small town, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of people in your audience that can empathize with this. I joined the military to get out of the small town. And
Yeah.
so uh, I already had my mindset on what I was going to do afterwards. But I won't say that once you're entrenched inside the military culture, it's really difficult to think about that too, right? Um,
Yeah. Well, it's a bubble,
thanks. Yeah.
you live in your bubble.
Yeah, I was fortunate to have people around me who had either done this before. I not related to the singer, but Jack Harlow was this guy's name. And uh or the rap artist, excuse me. But like Jack actually had been in the military for 20 years, and we had emailed even throughout my deployment, and he was talking about like what it takes to transition. And so he really helped me out quite a bit.
That is nice. And I think that, based on conversations that I've had, it's not necessarily something that's very prevalent, right? There are a lot of people that think, okay, I'm in. This is it. This is my life." My husband was one of the people that he wanted that to be his life, his career, and so it can be something that takes people by surprise when they realize that they're going to have to transition out.
It's an
Did
identity
you?
adjustment.
Oh
Sorry, I didn't
yeah,
mean to
of
interrupt you.
course. No, no, no. Please, please. I'm people want to hear you talk, not me here. So, no, you're absolutely right. It's a huge identity adjustment because you're talking about it's not just work, right? And we all spend a ton of time with the people that we work with, civilian or otherwise. But it's your work, it's the culture that you live in, it's the friends, your social, all of your social circle is there as well. The military it's a lifestyle. It's not just a job. So I think, it is really important to highlight that because it very much influences how you develop as a person, both professionally and personally.
Can I
We did
speak to that?
actually, oh yeah,
Can I
please,
speak that
please.
real quick? Um, just so like when I first got out, even though I had the mind on transitioning out and doing what I want to do, I mean, I still became like a life member of the VFW. I did what I call like the veteran triad when you get out. I became life member of like three different veteran organizations. And then so like I'm like a life member of the VFW, DAV and AMVETS. I am a disabled veteran too. So like, you know, um it's hard even if you had a mindset of I'm doing this because it's going to get me to the next step in my life, whatever that is. Or if you're one of those people who I was in and this is my life, I love this. Or if you were someone who was injured and ended up getting med boarded, there's a huge transition regardless of where you come from and where your mindset is, to going from military to being a civilian. And I want to be very clear, they are completely different. There are some transferable skills, but the reality is once you're a civilian, you can never go back to being military. That is in your past now. That is who you once were, and it is part of you, but it is not who you are today.
Was that hard for you? Or did you
Uh,
see other people have a hard time with it?
a few years of therapy helped quite a bit, to be quite honest. uh, that's just being blunt. Like,
Oh yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. Between my deployment with PTSD and then also, adjusting to the civilian world, I did go to therapy to help me with that. It wasn't easy. It's not
Mhm.
something that most people, if you talk to anyone else who is not in the military about a life transition, 99% of people didn't do that on their own. They had a support system behind them.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to flag because so much of military training, obviously depending on the branch, but like so much of military training is about being self-reliant, right? Because you need to be reliable so that everyone else can rely on you too. And so the idea of not being okay is not seen as, oh, it's okay, you'll just lean on everybody else. It's like, no, 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 you're supposed to be supporting everyone else. So you need to figure your stuff out and do this on your own. And I think you're right. It does very much highlight the fact that most people don't make these transitions on their own. So breaking that mindset has got to be very difficult.
The best piece of
Um,
advice I got about this was from my son's grandmother, Melissa Dow. She's the wife of a Lutheran minister and has been for 45 years. And she said to me, she goes, Chris, you have to understand something. It takes a village. Everyone. It takes a village for everyone. No single person, regardless of what they may think, is a lighthouse or a beacon.
yeah.
It requires a support system.
Yes. I mean, even the lighthouse and the beacon, right? They rest on stuff. They're not just out there floating, doing nothing. So very important. I love that reminder. All right. So as you were transitioning into your civilian career, can you tell us about some of the differences in leadership styles that struck you? Especially as you were comparing things in the military to what you were learning and seeing in the corporate world. What were the kind of differences in leadership styles that you saw?
I almost feel like at times there is no real difference between the overall themes of leadership in the military and the themes of leadership in the corporate world. That's the biggest misconception that I have found, I think, in my time since I've gotten out. And I ETS'd in 2010. So you can't yell at people, obviously. Like, I mean, you probably will go to HR for that, but you you shouldn't. Um, you not everything's a fire, not everything's an emergency. There's like probably like even in my role now, and like even when I was the leader of the Americas region of support for Thousand Eyes at Cisco, like nothing is a fire. Nothing. Not a single thing. Nothing is life, like, well, I should say most things in the corporate world are not life or death decisions.
Mhm.
Most things are not like, I've got to get these soldiers to this place at this time so that we can do this thing for the next 2 hours, and then we got to do that. There aren't things like that.
Yeah.
You have to really learn how to determine how you structure your day as a leader, even as an individual contributor. You have to determine how you structure your day as a leader or an individual contributor, what's important, what's the priority, and then treat the things that actually are fires like fires.
Mhm.
And then from there, in terms of like just general leadership, like I said earlier, it's extremely important that you don't come in and dictate what people are going to do. You, in the corporate world, and I think in general, it's a good idea. When you're ever in charge of a group of people, it's important that you treat them like colleagues. You want them to come up to your level at some point in their career. It's not about like keeping that person there. It's about finding ways to celebrate them and lift them up, because the reality is, regardless if you're a leader in the military or you're a leader in the civilian world, you have zero power. You have no power at all over your destiny. Your power is evangelizing your team to get done what needs to get done. And that's how you make yourself look good. You celebrate your team and build them up.
Yes. Yes. Oh, see, this is something we talk about a lot, in a lot of chats that I get to sit in on, is this idea of good management, right? And good leadership, and how you should be encouraging people to outgrow your leadership and outgrow their positions and outgrow where they are now. Do you think that was that was more of an understood thing within the military than it is within civilian culture?
The military sets up its systems such that it expects you, and the expectation is well known for you to excel. That's why, like in the Army, there's a point system for PT. That's why there's a
Mhm.
point system for rewards when it comes to your ERB in the Army. Or I don't know what it's called for other branches, but like when you're going up for points in the Air Force, for instance. So
Mhm.
like there's a reason why those point systems exist. It's just like in video games, like point systems exist so that you can push yourself.
Yeah, so you have something
So
to measure, so you know if you're
right.
getting better or not.
In the civilian world, you're going to hit like something. It depends on what acronym: KPI, OKR. So KPI is key performance indicators for anyone who may or may not know what that means, and OKR is like operational key. I don't know. It's a
Yeah,
Google thing.
something.
So it's a Google thing, and that's what they use. But yeah, you're always going to have some system that you're measured against, but it will feel a lot more nebulous and a lot
Mhm.
more heuristic in nature. What I mean by that is just it'll be kind of up to someone else's interpretation whether or not you did well. There is no static point system.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't think that a lot of times people in the civilian world, they get into a role and they love that role and that's where they want to stay. They don't want to
Mhm.
move. They don't want it to change because they like things to be static. What I would say is that as a veteran, You at some point in your life were asked to excel. I don't understand why you would stop just
Mhm.
because you're a civilian again. You shouldn't stop. Like these employers. Now, I'm speaking as someone who was a hiring manager at one of the largest networking companies in the world. There are programs at these companies that are designed to recruit veterans, and the reason why is because they know that they were asked to excel at some point. They want rock stars. They don't want people who just want to get into a role and sit there and twiddle their thumbs and draw a paycheck for the next 20 to 30 years. You did
Mhm.
that in the military. Just to be quite blunt, you did that in the military. And
Yeah.
now it's time to take what you learned and make something out of yourself. Like build yourself up. Use these programs like Power to Fly. And for context, they didn't prep me to say this. I like I'm saying this as a person who truly believes in this. Like I believe in like this service model of a post-veteran world where like as veterans who have done great things in their career post-military, they come in and show everyone like it's important that you try and don't just give up just because now your identity has changed. Sure,
Yeah.
you're no longer in the military. You're no longer that staff sergeant, that captain, that major. Now you're just Joe or Jane Schmo, or insert whatever name you want to use for yourself. Um, and you're just a cog in the wheel somewhere.
Yeah.
Make yourself the biggest damned cog there is.
Yes. All right. So let's talk about some of the relational differences. There's one of the things that my husband talks about all the time is this idea of like esprit de corps, which is not really a thing once you get into the civilian world. What do you think are some of the biggest differences between military leaders and their units versus corporate leaders and their employees, or at least at what you've seen?
In military units, like this is my experience. And whether it's when I was working AGR at an Air Force unit during the day, or active duty, forward deployed, or even at Hunter Army Airfield when I was at a clinic, military leaders are kind of well, not encouraged, they're beaten into their head that they need to make sure that they're keeping the morale of their team up. The easiest way to do that is through like esprit de corps. That's why it's such a big deal in the military. It's why, you always feel like these people that you served with, like the people that I went to Iraq with, I'm still friends with on Facebook. I still keep up with them. I still know what's going on in their life to this day. And that
Yeah.
was 14 years ago now. Um, that is the type of relationships you build in the military. It is certainly possible to do the same in the corporate world, depending on where you land. If you land in like a big corporate world, you're probably going to have like a small team of people that you get to know.
Mhm.
If you land in startup world like I have now, you're going to probably develop a really close relationship with a lot of different people. But at the end of the day, you know what it means. I think as former military, as veterans, we all know what it means to build esprit de corps, to build camaraderie. You can be that person. You don't have to wait for someone else to do it. And to
Yeah.
be quite honest with you, most people in the civilian world are not going to do it. They're not going to try to build camaraderie with you directly. And it can be a multitude of things. It could be a personality in the way that they are. A lot of times, at least in my experience, I've run into just people don't know how to interact with former
Yeah.
military, even though there's so many of us. Um, and it's on us kind of to, I'm just going to kind of be blunt, plug here, Meg, it's on us to not be assholes. It's on us to go out there and like, show these people what it means.
I think that's a good point, and it kind of it leads into one of the questions that we got from the audience here. Somebody had asked, how does business differ from the military services in how they define and train leadership? So let's talk about that. If you start off in the military and you're not in a leadership position, from the jump, as most people aren't, if they're not coming out of if they're, is it NCO, non-commissioned officers? So if you're not at an officer level and you enlist, you're not going to be in charge for probably a while. What does that look like, that training and that definition of leadership within the military versus the corporate world? I feel like in corporations, it's like, well, you're going to climb the ladder and hopefully you'll get into, leadership, but that's obviously can't be the line for everyone that enlists.
I have a good friend and a person who has been my boss for the past 5 years, give or take, at different companies. Um, who said something to me once that I think I'll never forget. And it's essentially this: no one is going to give you a job. No one is going to give you training. No one is going to just hand it to you on a silver platter for the most part. If you want that job, you have to be doing it already. You have to show the company that you have the skill set or the ability to learn the skill set required to take over that role. It doesn't matter if it's a higher level of being an individual contributor or being a leader. If you want to be a leader, show that you're a leader. Show up on time. Do your work. What does a leader do that you don't do as an individual contributor? That's the question you have to ask yourself. What look at your leaders in the military. What did they do that you didn't do? What did they show you that you need to emulate? And you can take it from, like, for me personally, I look at all the leaders in my life, whether it's Richard Dow, who's my son's grandfather and a Lutheran minister, or Martin Powles, who is a command sergeant major of MEDAC. For anyone in the Army that is not in the Army, that's a medical activity. That's the entire medical corps of the Army, who is also my platoon sergeant when I deployed to Iraq. I look at whether it's Kyle Busby, who is now a PA and a captain, who was in my unit when I deployed. I look at what they did. I look at what I saw as good leadership from them, and I incorporated that into my own professional life. And when I saw like a member of my team who needed some leadership or they were down on themselves and they talked to me about it, I took the opportunity to exercise those skills. And that's the ultimate point of this. You have to exercise the skills of being a leader first before a company will ever look at you to be a leader. And then from there, yes, those companies offer certain types of training, whether it's interview training or management training or whatever. There's also other institutions that offer free training in order to help you understand what it means to be a leader. But it all starts with emulating the good leaders that you saw before. And unfortunately, if you haven't seen any good leaders before, which is sometimes the case, I would recommend that you reach out to organizations that help build leaders in the corporate world, because they'd be more than happy to work with you as a veteran.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Okay, we got another question from the audience. This person wanted to know, what is your number one takeaway from military leadership training?
My number one
I'm very,
takeaway.
I'm still stuck on the idea of like, do the job before you have the job. Because I think, you made a really good point, which is like, people aren't necessarily going to see you as a leader if you're not acting as a leader already.
Yeah. As a veteran, once people find out you're a veteran, you're already going to stick out like a sore thumb, just to be quite honest. Like,
Yeah.
I think the thing I took the most from like military leadership training is the organization. Like, the biggest thing that you can do for yourself in your corporate life is take the organization that you were taught in the military and apply it. Like organizing tasks, organizing the way things are done, also following up. Like, that's the biggest thing that the military teaches you in leadership training is follow-ups, like whether it's an after action review or whatever the other branches of the service may call that. Once you complete something, coming back to it and understanding what you did right and what you did wrong and how you can improve it. That's a continuous process that doesn't stop. And it's one of the best things that the Army teaches its leaders how to do.
Yeah. Well, that's a good one. Okay. So what do you think, what elements of your military leadership training do you think really gave you that edge in the corporate world? Do you think that the organization was the biggest part of it? Do you think there's maybe a different factor that was really helpful and gave you that edge as you were trying to also be in leadership within the civilian sphere?
Whether you're, you know, regardless what leadership position you fall in the military, you tend to kind of get this overall view of how things are supposed to go, at least at your level. You want to be able to keep that broad perspective in mind in anything that you're doing, because how you show organizations that you're ready to be a leader is the ability to understand how that business works. Like in the military, we understood what, like, if someone sent us to the motor pool for 12 hours, we got sent to the motor pool for 12 hours because they wanted to waste our time. Like, I mean, or the reality is they wanted to make sure that like whatever was packed in vehicles was packed and the vehicle maintenance was taken care of and all that stuff. We all understood that. We understood that because we kind of got an idea of what was going on around us. And as you became an NCO, you got a broader picture of that. And you understood that like, there's a reason why like some colonel somewhere decided that this is the particular layout that we need to use. So we're going to use that layout. And so now that filters all the way down to the soldiers having to go to the motor pool and pull shit out of a up armored vehicle for 10 hours. You know, that's just happens, right?
Yeah.
You have to be able to keep that broad picture in this corporate world too. I would challenge everyone that if you understand your role, try to understand the role above you. Try to understand what your manager does. Try to understand why they ask you to do the things that they do. Try to understand what your director's doing and why they're asking you to do. How does that feed into the overall business? Organizational thinking, which is what the military teaches you, is probably the least known skill in the civilian world. And there's a reason for that. And there's a reason why there are organizations out there that specifically do organizational training, like and organizational thinking. And I'm sure, Meg, you probably have heard of these organizations in your role. And I know Power to Fly that probably is hooked up with a lot of these different ones too.
You know what? Honestly, I've heard more about it from my husband. He was Army, ex-Army, and I get a lot of this kind of stuff from him when I'm like, I don't understand. Like, it's much less in this job, thankfully, but like every other job I've ever had where I'm like, I don't understand why they're doing this. This makes no sense. Like, why would they change it? Blah, blah, blah. And he's always been able to come in and be like, well, you told me that they were doing this and this and this, and that makes sense. And then probably your boss has to worry about this and this and this and this. So like, I wouldn't do it that way, but I could see why they're doing it. And it always kind of boggled my mind because I was like, well, you're not in purchasing. You're not in, what was I at the time? Retail marketing. Like you're not in these worlds. Like how does this make sense to you? And it was absolutely what you're talking about, that idea of trying to understand the holistic, the organization and everything as a whole, and then seeing where you fit within that. And I feel like, at least from the sole civilian subject, I don't know that that was ever really very like explained to me very well. I think I've been so stuck in the individual that it's very hard to try and even, conceive of the larger picture. But no, I think that's excellent. I love that answer.
You know where this type of training actually exists the most, and the reason why I say it's so important? Executive levels. Executive levels is where they actually do the most types of training around organizational thinking. Once you start getting into director level, VP level, that's where they do it. So you have to think about this. Because you were in the military, at least in terms of thinking about the way a company works, you're about 20 years ahead of everyone else. Not an exaggeration, not a joke. It's just a reality.
Yeah. I love that. All right, Chris, this time always goes really like way too fast, but I have very much enjoyed getting to talk to you today. Thank you so much. And I hope that we'll get to talk again soon.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.